Alright, so I will be doing a tier list ranking of all the LCK teams, and I've already thought through this a bit, but I will give some of my explanations why I think certain teams fall where they fall. And yeah, let's get right into it. So as you can see here, I've kind of ranked all the teams already. Actually, on the left side you have the best team in my opinion, and on the right side you have the worst one. Alright, and so let's get right into SKT. So this team changed only one player over the off-season, which was the top laner. And now instead of Kana, they are going to have Zeus. Zeus played for them a bit last year as well, but regardless, they decided for Kana in the end. And Zeus was a very hyped rookie player coming in. I think he's still like 17 or something like that, extremely young or very young, and definitely a talent. If you have maybe watched some of his solo queue games, he definitely has the individual skill to be on SKT. The issues that he had were maybe some champion pool issues, and mainly just being new. So I expect a lot of this stuff to be ironed out. I think that probably T1 already worked on some of the stuff last year, and they should continue doing so this year. And the rest of the roster is just great overall. You have Faker, a rock in the mid lane, Owner, one of the standout players in Summer Split, and a guy that I feel like T1 had big jungle problems for maybe like 3 years now, essentially ever since the new lineup. Whenever they usually were using Cass, sometimes they were also using LM. LM looked a bit better than Cass in my opinion, but also Cass was a bit more stable, I would say. But both of these players were not really to the standard that you expect from an org like SKT, for an org that is supposed to be challenging for worlds and maybe even winning worlds. So that was a big issue. Well, with Owner coming in, that seems to be rectified. And the bot lane, of course, Gamayushi Keria probably the best support in the league, and Gamayushi, one of the again most hyped rookie players from last year, and definitely a big guy to watch out for coming into this year. So I will obviously put them in S tier, and why so? Last year they were the second best team. I think this time they can actually even improve and be potentially the best team in LCK. And the reason being is mainly that Damonkea actually downgraded their roster. They are not as strong as they were last year. And also that this roster actually looked extremely good at Worlds the last time we have seen them. And I think potentially if they had more time, if maybe some of the coaching issues were not present for the majority of the year, they could have even upset Damwon and maybe won the Summer Split trophy. Of course, that did not happen, but I think that so far we've only seen this team improve, and I don't see why this couldn't continue. I think Zeus is a good replacement for Kana, and the rest of the team is just solid overall. There's nothing to say. I would say that unfortunately for me, they don't quite have the upside of some of the other teams maybe, and at maybe MSI or Worlds, I could see them struggling against some of the Chinese teams that are going to be coming in there. But as far as LCK goes, I think they are kind of the mark that is set for the other teams to beat. Okay, my second team is Chenji. And Chenji actually changed quite a bit. They removed BDD, pretty long-standing mid laner for them, as well as Klit, this duo of jungle mid, were the two players that I watched out for the most on the roster. I feel like they were, on one side, they were the kind of two players that carried the team, but on the other side, oftentimes they were also the main problems, and especially the mid jungle synergy in the early game was often lacking, and BD just to me did not seem like to be the caliber of player as, let's say, Chove or Showmaker, and these two players oftentimes just beat him in lane, beat him outside of the lane as well, of course. And yeah, that was always kind of my main problem with JNG, and why I never really trusted them to be anything special. Of course, they could always keep up at those number 2 and number 3 spots, but they were never really, to me, title contenders, or they were never that dangerous of an opponent for someone like Davonkia, for example, last year. And this year, though, they have Chove, in my opinion, the best mid laner in the world, maybe. Chove can play a bit too selfishly at points, but we've also seen him sometimes just hyper carry the entire game on his own. So I'm excited to see him on finally on a roster of his caliber. But is this roster actually that great? Ruler, Lehans, I don't think we have to talk much about those two. Ruler, of course, is staying. Lehans is considered one of the better supports, although I would maybe doubt it a little bit. Lehans, other than the Griffin lineup, did not have many great performances, and I feel like on Griffin you had Viper, who is now considered the de facto best AD carry in the world. Then you had Chove, of course, where they are uniting here, where Chove is also among the best mid laners in the world. And then you had Tarzan, who also at points was considered the best jungler in the world and could still be maybe considered the best jungler in the world. So I'm a bit hesitant saying Lehans is actually as good as maybe his reputation is. But I certainly would say that this bot lane should still be among the best in LCK, and definitely a very stable bot lane that shouldn't be a problem per se in JNG, although they might not carry many games. And then where my main problems are with JNG, and why I don't think, for example, that they are going to beat T1, and why I would even be maybe hesitant to say that they can beat Damonkea, and that's the top side. They have Doran and Peanut there. Again, Doran reuniting with Chove from their Griffin days, and I think they were both playing on Dragon X, but were they playing together or not? I'm not sure now. Regardless, definitely these two players probably know each other. They know how each other wants to play, so that's good. My issue is, though, that Doran can be a bit too coin flippy. I would say he's definitely, actually, he's probably in the top 5 top laners in LCK, but he's most likely, or actually for sure, he is in the bottom half of the top 5. So I already can see them struggling if Doran is going to be trying to play a bit too much for himself. That could be an issue for this roster. If Doran can just play out and let the bot lane and mid lane carry, then I think this roster is going to be completely fine. But if Doran tries to get resources for himself and try to be the main carry, main focal point of the team, that's where JNG can actually run into some trouble. And then you have Peanut last, and I have a love and hate relationship with this player. I think Peanut is at points brilliant and one of the best junglers, if not in the world, then in LCK for sure. But he so oftentimes disappoints in big series, in playoffs, in gauntlet runs and stuff like that. And last year on Ongshim, he was kind of the guy, the kind of key point where, depending on his performance, you could say whether Nongshim are going to win or lose. And while that can be a good thing on a team like Nongshim, where they needed someone to carry it, I feel like this is going to be more of a hindrance in a team who, again, is supposed to compete for the number 1 spot, who is supposed to go to Worlds, who is supposed to play very well at Worlds. So Gen.G, I'm putting them A tier instead of S tier, and that's simply because I don't think they quite have the upside that SKT have. I think Chovy can be a massive carry, and if this team can unlock him, then they could potentially even win LCK, but I'm a bit hesitant, and I think actually other than Ruler and Chovy, there are big question marks on all the three other players that are joining the team, and especially Doran and Lehens. It feels like maybe Chovy had some say in who they are going to get. I think Doran is actually a downgrade from Rascal, for example, and Lehens might well be a downgrade from Life as well. So, yeah, initially I thought this roster was going to be great, but the more and more I'm thinking about it, I'm actually not as impressed with this roster at all. And the last team that I would consider the championship contender or title contender, that's going to be Damunkia. I'm going to put them in A tier as well, and it's pretty simple. Damunkia, obviously the most dominant team for the last 2 years, but they made a lot of changes, and I thought that Nuguri was going to play for Damunkia, but for some reason he's taking a break. I know that he had some maybe mental health issues, and also of course some actual physical health issues. I think the collapsed lung was one of those. So maybe that's the reason Nagari just does not feel well enough to play. But if you had Nagari there with Canyon and Showmaker who are staying for the roster, then all of a sudden this is one of the best teams in the world again. But without them, instead you get Birdle into playing. I mean, they have Hoya as a sub, but I don't expect to see much of Hoya. If DK have to reach out and get Hoya for top lane, then they have very big issues. And then you have Dagdam and Kellen in bot lane. Actually, this bot lane could surprise a lot of people. I think two of the less known names, but two of the more hyped names by people in the know. And especially Dagdam has been performing magnificently last year, and since the meta should be shifting towards more of a bot lane centric style, that can definitely be of service to him. And Kellen also a very stable, just overall good support. So yes, this roster is very solid. I think the bot lane is actually a big upgrade. The top lane, unfortunately, is a bit of a downgrade for me, or actually a pretty big downgrade if you consider the legacy of Khan and Nagare before. And so now the actually whole playstyle of the team is going to have to shift from playing for top side to playing for bot side now. That is good, since the meta is going to allow that, and the meta is for the first time in like 3 years shifting away from top lane carry to more of a bot centric meta, so that's great. But I just don't feel like Birdle is the top laner you want to get. For example, if DK just got Rascal from Genji, I feel like that's a guy who can play weak side top lane all day long, and he's going to be fine with it. He's going to just do his job, and meanwhile, if the bot lane and mid lane carries, they carry. But Birdle is a big question mark, a rookie. He played a couple of games on Genji last year, did not look all that great, looked like a good mechanical player, but did not have quite as good of a lane management, which is something very important for top laners. So this team definitely can once again reach those highs, and Showmaker and Canyon are both still among the best players in their roles, but the rest of the team is where I wonder and where the issues might arise. So I feel like just having just having Showmaker and Canyon is enough for Damwon to get the A spot and be the de facto number 3, and they could potentially even win the league. I'm not saying they couldn't, but I don't see them being this dominant force, and definitely don't see them winning another championship per se. yeah, not even getting to the final at Worlds, for example, like they managed last year. Okay, so now I feel like these three teams are kind of the favorites of LCK for me. Initially, I considered putting them all in the same rank, but I feel like SKT just are that one little step higher than the rest. Now let's get to the rest of the teams. So the next team I have is Nongshim Red Force, and I'm going to just rank them in B tier. I don't think they are on the same level as Chenji and Damwon, but they are quite good. And so the roster of this team is Kana, Dread, BDD, Ghost, and Effort. So right off the bat, actually they have a support as well named Peter. I don't know much about this guy, so I'm just going to act like he is not going to play, which is most likely the case actually. So Kana going from T1, of course. Dread going from Africa Freecs. BDD going from Chenji, Ghost from Damwon, and Effort from... Where did Effort actually play? From Nongshim. So Effort is the only one staying? No, from Live Sandbox, that's right. So what about this team? Why did I feel like maybe some other people would rank them a bit lower, but to me this is just a roster of very solid, very top half of the players basically in LCK, just all around. I think the only player that could be considered not as good is Ghost, but we'll have to see how much of the issues Damwon Chaos bot lane had were due to Ghost and how much it was his bot lane partner, because Effort is, in my view, one of the best supports in the league and could definitely be a very important member of this team, whereas Beryl, I think, at least towards the end of summer last year, was really a shell of his former self, and I'm not even sure. Yeah, actually, he gets a spot on one of the teams, but you can obviously see that most of the organizations agree with me. And yeah, what to say about this team? I don't think much. Actually, one player I would like to pick out is PDD. I think I was a big BDD hater, but at these Worlds he just showed a form that I have not seen from him for at least 2 years. And if he can continue that form, if he can continue these sort of performances like he had at Worlds, I think this roster can potentially even challenge some of those other teams towards the top of the rankings, and are a pretty big lock for the number 4 spot, at least for playoffs for sure. And Kana again, just an all around solid player. I think that he was done a bit dirty by T1. Of course, he himself posted some stuff that is very much disappointed about how the off-season went, that T1 decided to go with Zeus. Although I can understand their thinking, I also think that Kana should, at least for the spring part of the season, be still better than Zeus, or on the same tier as Zeus. And Dread, although he can be a bit streaky, he can have some bad performances, has been one of the 2 outstanding members on Africa for the past like 2 years basically. So another player that I think could finally get the chance to show up. And then the bot lane, I mean, Effort is great, Ghost not so much, but if this bot lane can just survive and wait for the rest of the map to do their stuff, then they are going to be completely fine. The only problem with Nongshim is again this shift towards a more bot-centric meta, where Ghost could actually struggle against some of the other bot lanes. That being said, again, I don't think Ghost is like... Usually when people talk about Ghost, they are either saying that he is like top 3, top 5 ADC in the world, or they are saying that he's a complete shitter. I don't think that's the case for either point. He's somewhere in the middle for me, and we'll have to see just if he can step up or if he's going to crumble, basically. All right, and the other team in this B tier for me is going to be Africa. So they now renamed to Guangdong Africa. Oh, sorry. Guangdong Freecs, not Africa anymore. And so again, I'm just going to run down the roster. Keen, LM, Fate, Teddy, and Leo. And on paper, at least 4 of the 5 players on this team look very good. Teddy, one of the best ADCs. Leo, sorry, not Leo. Hoyt. Leo is of course the substitute ADC. But Teddy, Hoyt, LM, and Keen. Hoyt, you could debate whether or not he is quite there, but LM, Keen, and Teddy are definitely, I would say, Keen and Teddy are definitely top 2, top 3 in their role in LCK. LM, a very good, just I think pretty well-rounded jungler. My issue is though the mid lane, Fate, and the support Hoyt can actually be a problem as well, but mainly mid lane, Fate. This guy has been the kind of supportive mid laner that doesn't really disappoint, but doesn't play all that great either for quite some time now. And I just don't see Freecs beating any of the teams I put above them with this sort of a mid laner. I think Chovy is just going to have a field day against him. So is Showmaker. I think Faker could potentially upset him as well, and BDD also. So this is my main issue. I think that in League, for basically the majority of the League of Legends lifespan, you have to have a good mid laner to have a chance, and unfortunately this is where, to me, Freecs are going to crumble once again. And I'm so sad because Keen has been on this roster for like how long, 5 years or something crazy like that, a huge chunk of his career. Yes, it's 2017 he has been on this team. And then you have Teddy, of course, also one of the best players in LCK, regardless of his role. And I just feel like this is just going to be another one of those Freecs rosters that is just middle of the table, does not disappoint but does not impress either. And then the last team that I would put in B tier is going to be KT Rolster. Actually, should I put them in B tier? I think I will put KT Rolster in C tier, just because, in my opinion, they are just tiny bit weaker than the 2 rosters in B tier. And just to run down the roster again, it's Rascal top, Kaz jungle, Arya mid lane, aiming ADC, and life support. So again, I think this roster is basically just a very solid all-around roster. Rascal, great weak side top laner, can play some carries, is never going to feed, can actually sometimes carry you games, but most of the time he's going to be somewhere in the middle. Cass, another one of T1's mid laners. Half the league is now T1's mid laners actually. And just a very solid, more of a power farming jungler who's not going to be necessarily the best, especially in this meta where you need to gank a lot. So that's maybe a bit of a gripe I would have against this roster. And Arya, a mid laner from Japan, who we've seen at Worlds. I think this is a good experiment for a team like KT Rolster, who are maybe trying to rebuild a bit, who are maybe not necessarily trying to spend as much money. But I don't see him being this like huge, outstanding star who is going to carry KT more further than to playoffs, basically. Yeah, that's my main issue. I feel like Arya, he was pretty good at Worlds. I wouldn't even say he was the best player on his roster. Maybe he was actually, but yeah, I think the competition of LCK mids, Chove, Faker, BDD, Showmaker, all these players. Again, I'm going to probably repeat it every single time after this roster. If you don't have one of those mates, if you don't have a mid laner that can compete with them, you are going to be in a lot of trouble. And unfortunately, I think Arya can compete with them, but I don't think he can beat them necessarily. And then the rest of the roster, aiming, just again, pretty mediocre. Alright ADC. I don't have any issue with aiming. I think he can be on a good team if he's like the last person that joins. But I think in this roster you just don't quite have the firepower of the players in order to be able to basically beat some of the stronger teams. That being said, I think the floor of this team is also pretty high. I don't see them really dropping many games against some of the other rosters like Hanwha or Brion. So KT roster for me are the only ones in C tier. Now I'm going to move on to D tier. So next up are going to be Dragon X. So the roster is Kinjin, Peoshik, Zika, Deft, Taehun as a substitute AD carry, and then you have Beryl as a support. So Deft is joining back in to Dragon X, Beryl also joining, and the top side of the map is basically staying the same other than the mid lane change, where Zika is now the mid laner for this roster. Zika is a guy I don't know much about. He has played on Bilibili last year. I have seen some of his games. He was not bad, but he wasn't outstanding either. So this is a guy I would like to see more from. I'm definitely interested in what he can do. And the rest of the roster is also very solid. Peoshik, I think, has the potential to be one of the better junglers. He might not be as good mechanically, but for example, his Udyr, of course, champion which he basically invented in spring, carried them to the championship with much worse players. I think Beryl, if he can kind of get rid of his ego and start practicing again, could once again be one of the best supports in the league. And Kinjin is a guy who's very much underrated. I have been watching this guy ever since he was behind Smap on KT Rolster, and I think it's great that he's finally getting a chance. Last year he looked pretty good to me, and he was the actual main carrier of the team. If Peoshik and him did not carry, this team was not winning. So I would like to see that continue with a bit of a more stable, better bot lane in Deft and Beryl. And if that can continue, I think this team can actually even upset and maybe be higher than I rank them right now. My ranking for them is going to be just behind KT on the C tier. Initially I wanted to put them D tier actually, but right now watching the roster I feel like they have a bigger upside and they could potentially upset some of the teams even above them, like Freecs, Kangdong Freecs and Nongshim. And next up are Live Sandbox, and I think this is the last of the kind of good teams. Then we are going to go towards Brion and Hanwha, and I have a lot to say about those two teams and the roster building that went into them. But first let me say what Live Sandbox have. So they have Duff in top lane actually. If I'm pretty sure that's a role swap, right? Did Duff play mid? Yes, so Duff is role swapping to top lane, it seems. Howling as the second top laner, Croco in jungle, Closer mid lane, of course coming in from T1, Ice and Envy as the two ADCs, and Kyle as a support. So a pretty young new roster. Some of the players already played on Live Sandbox before. Duff, of course. Croco also staying. And I think these two players are actually the better parts of the roster, other than Summit, who of course is now in C9, so probably Live Sandbox just could not afford to keep him, right? Anyhow, Dav, I think, is actually top lane could suit him a lot more than mid lane. In mid lane, he was more of the supportive style of mid laner, again similar to Fate. And at points though, he just wasn't able to carry hard enough. So if they get Dav or Howling, I don't know much about Howling, but he seems to be a newcomer, so that could be good potentially. Usually LCK rookies are very good, at least skill wise, mechanically. So I think this roster is just overall solid. Closer also someone who I wouldn't necessarily put in the top bracket of the mid laners, but he's serviceable, and he can have his bright days where he can actually even maybe upset some of the best mid laners in the league, unlike players like Fate, players like Arya, players like maybe Zika, although I don't know much about that guy, so maybe he's going to surprise me as well. And then the bot lane, honestly, I don't know much about either of these guys, but from what I know, I think they are not going to be necessarily a huge carry threats, but I think they are going to be completely serviceable. And most importantly, I just trust the coaching staff of Live Sandbox more than Hamva or Brion as well. So I think this team is going to basically by default probably end up in the 8th place. I would, to come back to the ranking, I would put them in D tier. I think they are not quite there. They are not quite as good as KT Rolster or Dragon Eggs, but they are also definitely not F tier. And then Hamva are going to be in F tier, and so obviously Brion are in F tier as well. Brion, the worst team. Let me just read out the roster. So Hanwha Live have Dudu top lane, OnFleek/Weiler in jungle, Charismate, Samdi ADC, and Vista as a support. So basically all the good players from Hanwha are leaving, while the bad players are staying, and they get a new mid laner, new ADC, and Weiler had some good games. So did OnFleek. Dudu is not terrible, although he's not good either. Yeah, basically I don't see any upside for this roster. I don't think, even if they like play out of their minds, I can see maybe them barely making playoffs, but even that is a stretch to me. And that's what actually I want to talk about. I mean, LCK seems very good to me this year, or at least this split. A lot of new exciting rosters, a lot of the substitutes from T1 and from other rosters are actually now spread out across the league, so the league could be a lot more competitive. Also, Genji are trying to build kind of a super team, although I wouldn't necessarily call it that myself. Damunkia also having some new rookies that might impress. And T1, of course, continuing what they started last year with Zeus, with Gamayushi, promoting these just insanely mechanically skilled players to the main roster. But then you look at Hanwha Life, and it's like everyone got a pick and Hanwha stayed behind. They forgot that there was a draft, and they just got the 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th player on every position. I think the only saving grace for Hanwha Life is that there is a team such as Brion, which has even a worse roster. And Brion, those are the worst. That is the worst team for me. Although now that I'm looking at it, actually in the end they might be better than Hanwha, to be honest. The only reason basically why I put Fredit as the worst team in the league is because they have Morgan and Sword, and that has to be like the worst duo of top laners that you could possibly have. I mean, Morgan last year on Hanwha basically single-handedly almost kept Hanwha from going to Worlds. In the end, Chove did not let himself be dragged down, but Morgan was so terrible. I don't know if... I mean, he's pretty young, but I don't know if I would even give him a second chance. Then you have Sword, who is just permanently basically stealing checks ever since he got carried by the foursome on Griffin. Just going down to Academy. Now that Academy is no longer there, he's going back up to LCK, and this guy probably is a very good talker because his skills are also not there at all. And then the rest of the roster is like not much better. Unti is pretty good at times. Lava is a serviceable mid laner. Henna and Delight are also okay bot lane. So yeah, maybe in the end, actually, I would put Fredit above Hanwha, but I just don't know what they are doing with their top lane, and they might get lucky because now top lane is not as important as it used to be, but man oh man, is this roster a mess, and these two teams are by relegation, should stay in LCK and in all the leagues for that matter. Alright, so that's it. If anyone has any suggestions or comments, just post them down below. I'm going to be reading them, and maybe I'll do a follow-up in a week or two once some of the games are played. I would also like to do some VOD reviews, stuff like that. So stay tuned for that, and have a nice day.